welcome back to the show. I'm here with Mike Brunt, also known as CF Whisperer, and we're going to be talking about his upcoming Into the Box session, Tuning and Troubleshooting Using ColdFusion Native Tools. And we're going to be looking at, well, first of all, we're going to look at why you should even monitor your server, and I'll explain why some people don't even do that, and how and why you use the built-in tools in the CF Server Monitor, the hidden features of CF Stat, and why you should be load testing all of your CF apps. So welcome, Mike.
Hiya. Good to see you again. Good to be here.
It's good to be here. Good to be alive on the CF Alive podcast.
Right.
So yeah, before we get into, what you're going to be talking about at the Into the Box conference on troubleshooting and tuning ColdFusion using the native tools, let's back up a bit because, in the recent State of the CF Union survey, if I can say it, 18% of people didn't monitor their server at all. And the people who take that survey tend to be the people active on Slack and in forums and what have you. So you'd hope they're the cream of ColdFusion developers, right. Which makes me wonder if the people who didn't take the survey, probably even more, don't monitor their servers. So why should someone be monitoring their ColdFusion server?
Well, because first of all, the logging in ColdFusion is great. It's the best I've ever come across in any application server environment. There's a wealth of information in there, and it's a great place to start monitoring your server. And I'll step back and say everybody should monitor, particularly production machines, because it was Nielsen, I think, that had a survey some years ago which said after 8 seconds, anyone on the web page would go elsewhere if they had an alternative. So that's not 8 seconds. It doesn't sound like a long time, but there's a lot of. I wouldn't be still doing what I'm doing if there wasn't a lot of issues going on with performance, on web servers and application servers. And it's not just ColdFusion. I have other clients, I've worked on PHP, I've worked on .NET, and they all have their issues. And just reiterating something here, PHP and .NET, the logging in those environments, unless you buy a pretty expensive third-party tool, it's just not where it's at. Now, I can do my work, even though I'm presenting on a tool set that ColdFusion has, I can do my work without any tools, external tools. I can do it by just literally looking at the logs. And I've blogged a lot about that to try and help others. But yeah, we should be, at the very least, we should be looking at those logs at least once every week. And looking for...
Either directly at the logs or using a server monitor to see what's going on.
Right. And there is a server monitor in ColdFusion. There has been for some time. But I'll explain in a minute what the best feature of that is, which is better than most others that are out there, even the commercial tools. But yeah, at least every 7, and it gets. There's an addendum or that's not the right word, but anyway, if you're going to put new code out there of any note, you need to check what's going on, because, and again, it's like flogging a dead horse. It's not expensive to do so, apart from time.
Yeah, but the server monitor that's native to ColdFusion comes with ColdFusion,
right?
So.
Yeah, so but a lot of people, again, I just reflecting again for a minute and not being critical of anything or anyone. And it's not just ColdFusion. Most people do not look at what's going on in the server. It doesn't matter what it is, and it's a general issue. Now, to answer your question, why? Well, you didn't ask why. Why do they not? You asked why should they, which I think I've sort of address. But the whole of it's a very interesting time, and I'm going to just go off at a tangent for a minute. So the Internet of Things, which is growing quickly, there are tremendous security issues in legacy, sensors and things, and that's because, and it happens in our world too, the times to develop things are unrealistic, largely speaking. So the business of checking servers and so on is like a luxury that very, very rare people think we've got, the time to do. That's my experience.
It's sort of like the luxury of not taking out insurance on your house and then wondering what happens if it burns down.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. That's a great analogy. There was a thing years ago, which has been documented a lot, that 70% of software development projects fail. And that doesn't necessarily mean they don't go anywhere. It means that they do go somewhere in some cases and they fail, and the other maxim, of course, is it's always easier to do things after the fact, but it costs a lot more. You'd be better doing them in the first place when we did.
Right. Yeah, I sometimes think on some projects they would have been, controlling the Titanic, and then after it hit the iceberg, then they would be throwing resources to stop it sinking.
Yeah, right. Well,
instead of steering the course right in the first place.
Well, yeah, and that's just a quick one on that. There's a fairly learned article that says that the Titanic had a huge fire on board from before she set off. That's sort of another.
Wow.
That's having something, I mean, I've worked on projects where people don't want to touch the code because they're frightened to death of, what might happen. That sort of thing.
Right. There might be an iceberg underneath the hood there in the code.
Fire or whatever. Exactly.
Yeah. So, let's talk about the built-in monitor to ColdFusion. Why should people use that instead of using CFusion or Fusion Reactor or one of the more expensive tools out there?
Well, I've had a lot of clients with small applications, small, setups, and a lot of them, don't want to spend the money on CFusion and Fusion or Fusion Reactor. I did do a blog piece actually, because ColdFusion is running on Java. Just so we all know, there's a lot of open source tools out there that you can use. And I actually did a blog piece on those. So you don't necessarily have to buy, a product. Not that having said that, I worked on the engineering of CFusion, so I have a lot of respect for that, and I know the people very well at Integral, and Fusion Reactor is a great tool too. But I just wanted to show what else is out there, because not many people have done. I wanted to do something interesting, I hope, and not many people have presented much on server monitoring. In fact, it has a bad reputation, and it's marginally deserved that you mustn't, in production, you mustn't set up memory tracking because it can interfere with performance. But you can just leave that out. And one of the most powerful things about it, which I'll show at the presentation, is its notification capabilities. Now, CFusion and Fusion have that too. So you can be emailed or whatever if if your server hits a certain threshold. Maybe it's, I don't know what it might be, 80% of the memory is used up. It's got 15 threads that have been running for 30 minutes, that sort of thing. But the really powerful thing, about ColdFusion server monitor, and it's easy to do in one place, is you can create something called a snapshot. So what happens then is, if you get emails saying the memory is 80%, used up, ColdFusion will dump a file of everything going on at that time, a full stack trace, all the queries that are running, all the queries that are in, query cache, if you've got that going, very, very, what the state of the JVM. So then it's all in one file. I mean, Fusion Reactor, for instance, has incredible capabilities for logging, but there's a few different logs. The thing I like about snapshots is everything is in one file, and it gets dumped at the time of the problem. So I find that to be very powerful. And I particularly speaking, even people who use server monitor, which I haven't come across many, a lot of them don't know about that. And it's a great thing. So,
yeah, it sounds really useful if you're trying to debug what's going on, what's causing a server to be slow or crashing.
Right.
And also, it sounds like there's some neat features built into Server Monitor that you might not have in some other monitoring tools, but also the fact that it's bundled with ColdFusion. So if you want to try out server monitoring without buying something extra, it's a way for folks to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And, and it's obviously part of the, it's part of the ColdFusion. It runs on, I'm pretty certain I'm right, I think it runs on Jetty, which is a separate servlet container. So Because I know there were problems at first with it. A lot of people probably think, I think memories are long, aren't they, in our world? And there were performance problems with it at first when it's Macromedia actually that put it out there. And, but they've engineered it differently, so there aren't performance problems anymore because it's running in its own environment, for instance.
So speaking of ColdFusion versions, is this on all ColdFusion versions? Adobe ColdFusion Standard, Enterprise, Lucy open source ColdFusion, or
good question.
Where do you find Server Monitor?
So either up to version 9 or 10, it was on all versions of ColdFusion. It was on, I'm pretty certain I'm right there, on Standard and Enterprise. So I think on version 10, it got ported just to Enterprise. And I've talked to Adobe about doing something about that, because to me, if ColdFusion, for instance, if ColdFusion Standard performs badly, that reflects badly on Adobe. And if it's difficult to find out what to do, it doesn't help. So I'm hoping as I say, I've talked to Adobe about it. I'm hoping I can persuade them to put it back in the standard edition. Because, and another reason, Michael, is people aren't buying ColdFusion Enterprise because of Server Monitor. They're buying it for different, Yeah.
And then what about the open source versions of ColdFusion? Do they have any monitoring with those, or?
No, not that I've seen. You can certainly, I'm pretty certain Lucy doesn't have a server monitor capability in native. You can obviously monitor, it's another Java application server, so you can monitor it with CFusion and Fusion Reactor and many of the other tools out there. One thing I'll probably do in future, but there isn't time on this presentation, is I'll show I don't want to take us off the tangent, but the JVM itself comes with monitoring tools. And I've used those, and maybe a future presentation I'll show what you can do with those too.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. So let's move on and have a look at the hidden features of CFStat. What is CFStat, for those who don't know?
CFStat is the first monitoring tool that ColdFusion ever had. Of course, it predates Fusion Reactor, CFusion by a number of years, and there's a reason for that, because CFusion and Fusion Reactor are actually Java servlet monitoring tools. CFStat was brought out, as you probably remember, Michael, years ago. I can't remember what version. It's a while ago, and of course it was when ColdFusion was running on a C++ core, not Java. And then when Java, it's sort of a funny story in some ways. When the switch to Java was made, CFStat went away for a while, in essence. So just to say what it is and why it's important, CFStat's a bit like a capability that's been in ColdFusion since it went to Java. It's called metrics logging. And that basically shows snapshots of the memory and threading state every X, whatever you set it to. I usually set it to 60 seconds. So before, that sort of also sidestepped CFStat a bit because it does similar things. But I had an experience lately, which I'm going to try and recreate at the conference. I was doing some load testing and looking at the server monitor and so on and so forth, and I had CFStat running too. And server monitor was looking like things were going okay. But then what happened is, when I looked in CFStat, I could see that quite a number of requests were being timed out, and that wasn't being reflected in server monitor. And, I'm not certain, I'd have to double check this, whether that's reflected in Fusion Reactor and CFusion or not. I mean, Fusion Reactor has a lot of capabilities, so many, in fact, that it's easy to get lost in, trying to find them. It's a great tool. But yeah, so that was a little thing that I saw, that CFStat showed me something that the other certainly server monitor wasn't showing me. And then it's important.
And CFStat, it comes with all versions of ColdFusion, or?
Yes. Yeah, it does. You can enable it in and it's a command line, by the way. It's not a GUI. And you can. The other great thing about CFStat is you can port it to a file. pretty easily. Again, I think a lot of these things, I've heard a lot of people say, I'm using this tool, but I don't know what it's telling me. That's an issue, or I get confused by all these different things. And like I said, I've had the fortune to be on the server side of things since 1999, and there were no tools. Well, CF Stat was there, but there was no. That's why I learned to live in the logs. Basically, it's funny. I'm now living in the woods. Right, literally in the logs.
So we talked a lot about monitoring and looking statistics, but what about load testing? Because I know very few people do load testing. Why should everyone be load testing their ColdFusion apps?
Well, it's the only way to find out what's really going to happen when you're out in the wild and you've got more than one developer clicking on one link. And it's not just ColdFusion. I mean, again, it's any application should be load tested, and also obviously we want to be looking at the database too, or any dependencies there are, and you can't. It's not easy to do that if you're just clicking around. And just to make, we've never had a better time for load testing, because I use, and I have for some time, JMeter, and JMeter is very fully featured, and it's as good in many ways as the really big names were, and like Load Runner and Silk Performer, and those tools. I mean, those tools were. I mean, you could be spending upwards of $100,000 to get anything meaningful. Because you have to buy it. Sorry, Michael. Well, because you have to buy.
And how does JMeter compare?
Oh, it's easily as good. It's very, like I said, it's very fully featured. And it's open source, so it's very widely documented. And if you want to do something that's more GUI based, JMeter is GUI, but it runs in a Java GUI. But there's a tool like there called BlazeMeter, which is web based, and it uses JMeter as the engine. So you can, you can really get up and load test. That's a commercial tool, BlazeMeter one. JMeter isn't; it's open source.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy to get load testing. It's not. I mean, all it involves, just so everybody knows, is what you do. You create a proxy, which is easy to do in JMeter, and you just browse around. And by the time you finish browsing around, JMeter's captured everything that's gone on. And then at that point, if you just want to be simple, you can just run load test from that. Just run what it's recorded. But you can also do other things like randomizing. You can multiple users with usernames and passwords, multiple product types. You can use CSV files to get randomized data in there. But just browsing around, you've got something you can load test.
And so you're basically simulating random load that simulates, hundreds or thousands of people coming to the site. And then you're discovering where the bottlenecks are in the application, whether it's in the ColdFusion code or the database or wherever the issues are. Yeah,
exactly that. And, again, using the tools that we've talked about and the things we've talked about, even if, I'll go back again and say this, even if you just install ColdFusion, you've no tools of any kind, just the logs themselves will deliver a lot of really valuable information. And like I said, I've blogged a lot about that. So hopefully there's stuff out there that's useful to people.
So let's switch to a slightly different topic, which I've been asking every speaker into the box, which is, why are you proud to develop, to use ColdFusion?
Because quite frankly, for what it does, I haven't found anything better. And, bear in mind at any point in time, I usually have 5 or 6 clients. Most of them are still ColdFusion, some are Java, but like I said, I've worked on PHP and I've worked on .NET, and those things don't have anything better than ColdFusion as for what it's doing, which is, providing the best of what it does is to provide a server mechanism to power front ends, whether they be browsers or phones or devices or whatever. I mean, none of those other tools are any better. I mean, the reality is there's a lot of fashion in development, and things go out of fashion. And what we must never forget, in my opinion, is ColdFusion. Without ColdFusion, the web as we have come to know it, the dynamic web, would have been a long time coming. You have to remember, ColdFusion was around before Bill Gates thought the internet was anything worth thinking about, or at least the web. And there's a bit of history there, by the way, which is you can find on a couple of blogs. So Microsoft made overtures to try and buy Lair.
Oh.
Yeah, it's blogged about by Jeremy Lair. And he put it in the blog piece that they were having too much fun. So when that happened, the next thing Microsoft did, they went to buy a company in Hawaii. I can't think of the name of it, and that's what ASP became. So yeah, I mean, ColdFusion. I think that, it's things, and it's never going to. The other thing is, in my opinion, in reality, it's never going out of fashion because it still does what you need it to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing about it is, which is fairly unique. I can't say it's totally unique. Is that you can develop full applications either in script or tag base, or mix the two if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else you can do that with.
Yeah, we sometimes forget how powerful it is.
Well, absolutely. And, here's a little story which we blogged about because the people talk about performance. We some years ago, we were tasked. There was a client who ran the Indianapolis 500 websites. And they'd never got through an Indianapolis 500. There's always been a major failure. So they brought us in, and we had 3 weeks. They were sort of panicking at the last minute. We had 3 weeks to take the sites from the hosting company they were with and put them into Amazon AWS and get them ready for the Indianapolis 500 on ColdFusion. And we worked a little bit with Amazon on that, and we for the first time ever, they got through the Indianapolis 500. And that's because we load tested the hell out of it inside out. We determined what was actually needed. And we didn't go crazy and say, let's have 100 servers. We got the right number of servers. We also used, which helped, Amazon auto-scaling, which is AWS auto-scaling. But the point I'm making is that was one example. Tuned properly and load tested properly, I have never seen anything that ColdFusion can't handle. I mean, another thing I saw just quickly is an iPhone front-end app that had ColdFusion as a back-end, and they were getting millions of requests a minute. There weren't heavy requests, but there was a lot of, every time there's a request, there's a thread. It doesn't matter what the request is doing at that point. So we were talking millions of requests a minute, and ColdFusion took that, and handled it. It just needs to be, tuned and monitored, and you can do all sorts of things with it. So yeah, I have no intentions of going away from ColdFusion. It's been good for me, and I also, just another quick point, I also applaud Adobe because Adobe are the first company since Alaire that actually have a dedicated ColdFusion conference. And they're a good team of engineers. They care about the product. They're responsive. A lot of people have thoughts on that, but I find them to be responsive, and approachable too.
So I know for many years some people have complained ColdFusion is dying or legacy. So my question to you is, what would it take to make ColdFusion more alive this year?
Well, that's a good question, and it relates to something that I think, anyway, it relates to something that I've proposed speaking on at the CF conference. They haven't accepted it yet, and they may not, but it's the API manager, which came out with CF 2016. It's an enterprise level feature, so I'm doing a lot of in-depth on that. My presentation, if it's accepted, will be on the administrator for the API manager because it's pretty, it's pretty detailed. And I think obviously APIs are most definitely, the core of most of what's going on nowadays. The close coupling that we had for a long time is taking a back seat because of all these different needs. I mentioned one of them, Internet of Things. obviously mobile and so on and so forth. So the close coupling is being, at this point in time anyway, is being replaced with APIs. And I know that Adobe have a lot of gusto behind it, and that's what I think could make ColdFusion more relevant this year. And I think just as another reflection point, because a lot of people got impacted by this when Adobe. This is a mild criticism, but it's meant to be a good one. When Adobe launched, launched ColdFusion 2016, nobody knew about it. I mean, I'm sure people like Charlie Earhart probably did, but the thing is, I went to download ColdFusion 11, and I couldn't find it, and I thought, what's this 2016? And that's the first I knew about it. And I'm pretty, I'm day in, day out in the ColdFusion world, so it was a bit of a botched launch, and that's not a criticism, but I hope if Adobe listen to this, they'll reflect on it and make sure that, and it was particularly unfortunate because the API manager was launched with it. But, a lot of people found the API manager by stumbling over it, So I don't know what happened. Maybe there was a miscommunication, but yeah. So that's important, I think, and I think it's certainly relevant. And there are other API, mechanisms out there. Adam Tuttle, I think, created one called Taffy, which was his version of that. So the point is, I think that's going to be important. But I think that we need to get that out there, and that's why I'm trying to do a presentation on it.
So, the Into the Box conference coming up in a little while. What are you looking forward to at that conference?
Well, I'm looking forward to my presentation because I hope it'll be. I always want to give people value for money, because they're spending money to get there. Lewis Mahano and his team are first-class human beings. All of them. I've known Lewis for many years, and I remember when I met him at first. He obviously evolved ColdBox from a client project that he was working on that he needed something that wasn't there, and what was very different about ColdBox at that time and still is the documentation. About the only thing that came close to ColdBox, which we both sort of worked on in one way or another, was Fusebox.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great, in my opinion, that was a great ColdFusion mechanism framework. But the thing is, ColdBox is still around, and in my opinion, I think my thought is you could sort of turn things inside out, and you could say buy ColdBox, use it for your applications. But incidentally, that's ColdFusion inside it, and Java obviously. But in other words, I think ColdBox could be another shot in the arm for ColdFusion because it is current. They keep bringing out new enhancements to it, and it's well documented. And like I said, the team that's behind it are first-class people. And I think that as we've seen over the years, one of the problems with frameworks is that they start with the greatest of intentions. There was a Fusebox community and there was a Fusebox committee, as we know. And it went on for a little while. Some of the others, when it's just one individual, it's great what they do in the first place for the community to put out a framework, but it becomes really difficult to keep it current, particularly when there are more and more users,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Brad Wood at Autis, and he was talking about how they automate the testing of these frameworks so they know it works on old versions and different versions of ColdFusion. So there's a lot of work that can go into that. Let alone the adding new features or supporting people who are using it.
Well, exactly. That as well. Brad, I met before he worked at Autis, but I could tell he was an incredibly bright, human being and hard working too. And they all are, like I said, and Lewis is one of the most genuine people. I think. I mean, I've met lots of genuine people, but Lewis has a heart of gold, and he's very, very genuine. A lot of time.
Yeah. So if people wanted to find more about you, how would they reach you?
Well, the best thing. I mean, yeah, so my blog is the best place, which is cfwhisperer.com. It's funny, I was quite embarrassed yesterday because I was looking at one of my articles and for some reason it's ended up with broken images that were working before, so I've got to figure that out. But one thing I like about it, and it's something I've concentrated on from the first time. I've had it for a good number of years now, and the first thing I concentrated on, it still to this day, is it's got to be performant. And, you know, it's pretty bloody quick. And because it'd be a bit pointless me putting, and you could say it's a bit, so it's still running on ColdFusion. It's not running in any of the, WordPress or anything like that. Because it's like eat your own dog food, to me. I don't want to, it's not the most beautiful looking thing in the world, that's for bloody certain. But, there's a lot of information in there and it works pretty quick. And my phone and my email are in there too. So, and I've come across quite a number of people out in the field when one of my clients have said, "Oh yeah, I got this off your blog." Yeah, and there's others, of course. Charlie Earhart. He's put some amazing information out there.
Oh yeah, he's got a whole complete set of information. Right. Usually when he writes on something, it's always comprehensive.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the podcast, Mike.
Yeah, it's great. And I hope people can understand me. Well, of course, you're not quite as broad as I am in your accent.
Yes, we'll need a translate from the north of England accent, but I think they'll understand you just fine.
Well, that's good. I hope so.
Okay, and good luck with your talk at the conference.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.